G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I am thrilled to get on Kate Campbell today. If you, like me, you've been through the airport and you've seen a book called Buying Happiness, Learn to Invest Your Time and Money, and you picked up a copy, let me tell you, it's a great read. And I often say about money books, finance books, it usually covers off a couple of things. One is how to spend less, how to save more, and how to invest better. But really what I feel is overlooks is the time element, which is the most crucial part of investing and spending and saving as well, which is the impact that has on time. And we know that from compound interest. Kate, welcome on. How you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing really well, and I love talking about how we can use our time and money better, because whether we like it or not, we're spending both of them every day.
Absolutely. And I mean, speaking of love and talking, you've got your podcast, the Australian Finance Podcast, which it's great to have you on as a guest. I've heard what you guys do as well. And I looked at it going, you guys are doing some incredible stuff with that podcast. I want to say congrats and kudos to what you're building there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's really cool how it's grown over the last 5 years. And it's really interesting how a few years ago, well, 4 or 5 years ago, not many people were having conversations about finance, and definitely not in public. And things like podcasts and YouTube and books and social media have just encouraged people to start having those conversations more and more, and breaking down all those barriers like fear, guilt, and shame that typically surround our memories and experiences when it comes to money.
Yeah. Money would be one of those conversations you may have had with very close people, maybe just with a planner or a finance person. But now you get to hear people's stories. Like I picked up one of the other books the other day, and they're talking about like people's actual portfolios and how much they're earning as a household. Like that is it's very personal data that's now coming out that people are actually happy to make public information as well and share what their portfolio is and how much they're earning and how much they're actually saving as well, right?
I'm not that brave, but a lot of people are willing to open up. And that is one thing that does help the conversation about money. People are seeing other real life examples of people, especially people not working in the finance or mortgage broking industry, that are working on their finances. They're setting goals. They're talking about money with their partner. And it opens that conversation and shows other people they can do it too. I guess the only downside sometimes I see with people being super open about their finances online, especially if they're very ambitious with their goals, is people can sometimes fall into that comparison trap where they're like, oh, this person is 30 and they already have purchased their first home and I haven't even paid off my credit card debt. So sometimes it can bring up feelings of comparison. So I think it's really important, if you are looking at someone's journey online, thinking about, well, what can I learn and take away from this? Not why are we different and why are we in different financial positions? Because you never really know where someone starts. They might start 100 meters behind you or 100 meters ahead. So thinking, what can I learn from this? What can I take away? What about their situation sparks my interest? Like if I'm maybe thinking, oh, how have they got a property at 30? Is property something I want to consider? Is that a goal I want to pursue? Or is there something else I want to do first in my own journey?
It's so important you say that, because I think the first thing is when you watch a video, it's like you make this about yourself and about the person, what their message is. So the first thing we want to do is put ourselves in that position. I think I read that from the Psychology of Money, is that when you see someone driving an expensive car, you're not looking at them, you're imagining yourself in that car.
Yep.
And I think I was like, I have never heard that, but I'm like, that is exactly what happens every time I see an expensive car. So for people that, I guess, at a younger age bracket, they're going, I say the only real estate you have as a teenager is your hair, which is probably why they go and get fancy haircuts. In your 20s, the real estate you have is your car. So you usually go and buy a car on a personal loan, for example. And then as you get into your 30s, now you're moving into the real estate game, which is trying to buy property. And some people do it in their 20s and some people in their 30s. But the average first-time buyer age, when we do our seminars and webinars, surprises people that it's actually sitting around 36 and 37 years old, which surprises a lot of people as well, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are rethinking what their goals are. And maybe 30 years ago, when our parents were buying properties, it seemed like a no-brainer, or there was a lot of social pressure to just jump into property. And there wasn't that much conversation about other types of investments. That's why it's so good that there's more information and conversation these days about really accessible ways to start investing. And so people can start with $5 using a micro investing app. You can just Google that and you'll see a few examples in Australia, or you can start with $50 or $500, depending on what platform you're using, and just start investing in exchange traded funds, which are just basically a basket of all the top companies in Australia or the US, depending on what you choose. So investing's so much more accessible these days, which is great because people have different options. You're not just having to think about, am I going to buy a property? It's, do I want to invest in other things? Am I wanting to invest in companies that I see and use in the world around me?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks very much, Kate. Before we do kind of go off and talk a little about what you're doing, bit of backstory, the Kate Campbell story. What can people know about you that's formed you to be the person you are today?
I had quite a different journey into finance. I started off in the Air Force doing air traffic control training, which really didn't work out, but it was my first opportunity to get a paycheck and earn some money and realize, hey, I just did my tax return for the financial year and I actually earned money for the first time at 17, 18, and I didn't have anything to show for it. So that was my very first turning point of, hey, I think if my life situation changes or a family member gets sick, I'd like to have a little bit of money put aside for an emergency. So that was the very first step in my own financial education journey. I've spoken to a few people before about how I basically started off learning through Google. I was a voracious reader. I looked at every blog, every video, every book there was to know about money and finance in Australia and the US, and took little pieces away from all of them and slowly started to piece my own financial plan together. So I was very much doing it all on my own at the start. And that slowly gave me the confidence to start talking to other people about money and what their experiences were, what they were saving towards. And all of this then led me into working in financial services because I was just really interested in the industry and thought, well, what better way to immerse myself than get a job in operations and just see how the whole world works. And that led me to doing the podcast and talking to many Australians about their finances and what they want to achieve, and whether it's paying off debt, buying a property, starting investing, or even saving and investing for their retirement. We talk about it all on the Finance Podcast, which is a great way to really have these conversations at scale. And even if you're not ready to have a conversation with your partner or your parents or your siblings or your friends about money and investing, you can listen to podcasts like ours and be a fly on the wall where you get to hear a financial advisor answering questions about finances, and you can learn that way and start to go, well, what actions do I want to take with my finances?
Yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate that. And I guess being on the inside of you worked at Citi, for example, and InvestSmart. So being on the inside of that, did anything surprise you? Did anything kind of reaffirm something about financial services that you know to be true today? Or was that image shattered a little bit?
The thing that I really learnt working in the inside, we'll say that, is that most people that work in finance don't actually have their finances sorted out. So just think about it. This is a huge industry. All sorts of people work in this industry. And so many people that I spoke to and I worked with were still people that hadn't really sorted out, what am I spending? What am I earning this month? They hadn't started investing. And so that was really interesting itself. Knowing about money doesn't equal being able to manage it and make good decisions about money. There's a huge gap between the literacy aspect of finance and the action part of finance. So that was one really interesting part. The other interesting thing was so much of finance is made out to be much more complicated than it needs to be. I've spoken to many people that have really fancy finance qualifications and great titles at different firms, and they make everything out to be really complicated, but then they end up often not outperforming a really simple investment strategy that many people that in our community follow, just using exchange traded funds to invest or property and things like that. So often finance is made to seem super complicated. That sells, it earns people more fees, but it doesn't have to be. And I think once you learn that it can be simple, then that unlocks a lot for you, because you realize you can set up a simple financial plan and get on with your life rather than having to spend every waking hour outside of your day job trying to pick the best investment possible.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah, they say complexity is the enemy, but yeah, I think what you say is just keep it simple, and you find that can outperform a highly kind of wrought out strategy. I want to go back to your book a little bit, and I talk about money becoming a learned behavior. I've said this quite a few times, where we replicate what we see in a family. That comes out in some of the throwaway statements that we get brought up, like, what do you think, money just grows on trees around here, for example? We don't have the money for that, or rent money's dead money, or we'll use a credit card and that's a learned behavior or seen behavior as well. And time would be another one, which is, hey, we don't have time, or we're always running late, or we're too busy for that. And again, to the detriment of a family, and passing that down to kids, and they grow up with these self-beliefs as well. So I guess as you're going through and you're putting your book together, did some of those limiting mindsets come into it? What have you seen from your research is what I'm trying to get at.
We learn so much from our family and from our childhood experiences with money. And most of us don't take a moment to even reflect on these experiences. We don't spend any time thinking, hey, what was money like at home when I was growing up? Was it something that was abundant? Was it something that was scarce? Was there something that was seen as something that only other people had and we can never have? And it's really interesting when people spend some time getting to understand and reflecting on their childhood experiences with money. It might have been through their parents, extended family, the way they learned about money at school, or through their social community. They start to realize, hey, some of the things I learned about money growing up, maybe they're not true. Maybe they're impacting me in a way I didn't quite realize today. So someone I spoke to grew up with parents that pretty much said, if you have money, you're greedy. You're not supporting other people. You should be giving it away and doing things with your money. You shouldn't be hoarding it and investing it. And this meant that once they unpacked that belief, they realized, this is why I can't hold on to money. I can't save it. I can't invest it, because I've got this mindset that investing is something I shouldn't be doing. And so it wasn't until they started reflecting on their childhood experiences with money that they could start working on their finances practically and saving money and investing money, because you can still be very generous with your money and support people with your time, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And some of the research I looked at when I was writing Buying Happiness actually shows that if we do spend our time and money on other people, we do get a massive happiness boost. But it's like the ads at the airlines. You do need to put on your own safety mask first. You do need to make sure that you've got your own financial future sorted. So thinking about, how can I look after my future self and be really kind to future me, but also put some money aside to help other people. And it doesn't have to be money. It can also be time. It could be taking a meal to a friend that's not doing too well, or offering to take them to an appointment, or just having a coffee with your parents when you might normally only see them once a month. Can you see them twice a month? So it's just thinking about, how can we spend a little bit more time and money on our relationships, because that adds a massive boost of happiness to our daily lives.
You've absolutely nailed it there. I think as a parent, I'm parent to two small girls, and our youngest daughter's just gone to she's kindergarten, so she's canteen money.
Yep.
And
I
I'm
remember that.
this is a new. I haven't had to deal with this because, new levels, new devils. And I was like, look, buddy, we have money, and Fridays is your canteen day, and trying to teach her about money, but not to go, we don't have the money. And it's going, hey, look, buddy, you can save some. Try to save for a pool, for example. So instead, when we go to the shops, it's, hey, buddy, we can't buy that today because we're looking to save for a pool, rather than saying you don't have the money. You got to catch yourself, because I think the easiest thing is just the reflex is, we don't have the money for it. And it's like, the more we keep saying that, the more they're going to grow up believing that.
Yeah. And instead of saying like we don't, we can say that this is our priority right now. Our priority is saving up for you to do this activity, or for the pool, or whatever it is. So talking, if your kids are of that age, like talking more about, what are your financial goals? Obviously, you can't get too much into the weeds depending on what age, but sharing your goals as a family and what you're working towards. I spoke to one parent who was they were planning a family weekend away to the country, and they actually got their kids involved in saying, okay, this is our budget for the weekend away. One of you is going to pick the location, one of you is going to pick the accommodation, one of you is going to work out what is our meal plan, and working out, how can we allocate this budget over this weekend away. So it's showing that money can be used for really positive experiences, but things do cost money. So how can we allocate our time and money across this weekend so everyone has a great time, but it's not an endless supply? So that was something that really worked for them.
I love it. Exactly. We had a guest on, so check out Jamin Fraser's episode where he talks about self-permission. But I think you said earlier before, which is the way we are can be kind to ourselves.
Mm.
And when sometimes you mentioned about that person that had to give away their money rather than hoard it, and that's a real mindset shift, right? To that not be selfish with the money, that you got to give it away to feel rich or to be abundant. But then you go, you don't have a time or a budget problem. You maybe have a priority problem. And we see that time and time again. Like, you show me your bank statement, show me your calendars, and I'll tell you what your priorities are. So again, when you're going through your research for your book, how have you unpacked that for people to understand going, we've all got the same time in the day. We've also got access to same similar-ish type of money or resources, but some can leverage it or use it better.
It is really important for people to work out their priorities. I think with time and money, there's a lot of baseline things that need to be sorted out. But if you're listening and you've already got the means to support yourself financially, and you can pay for things like rent, you can pay for your groceries, you can pay for the bills and all those kind of things, then what's left over each month? Working towards your financial goals and what you're spending money on, you can look at your priorities and really think about, how am I allocating my time and money best right now to suit my current priorities? And one of the activities that I shared in the book was doing a bit of an audit of your calendar and your bank account statement over the last month. So I start with a month. You can make that up to 3 months if you are ready to go the extra mile, but working through it and going, what are the 10 things I spent the most time on this month? And the 10 things I spent the most money on this month. So they're going to be quite different lists. But then you can start by looking through that list of time and money and where you've spent in what categories. And you can go through, do these align with my values? What I say that I enjoy, what I say I value, what I say I prioritize. So if I'm telling everyone and telling myself that I really prioritize my health and my relationships, but they're falling to the bottom of that list of the top 10 things I spend the most time on, or they're not even appearing, then maybe there's some way that we can more closely align our priorities or what we say we value with what we're actually doing. So I like this little audit process, and you can do it at any time. And it's just a quick way to check in and go, is what I feel that's important, or what my goals in line with what's happening in reality? And then you can just go away from this and say, what is one small change I can make with my spending and the way I'm using my time this week to more closely align what's important to me right now with what is happening in reality? So I think that's a really practical exercise to do. And I'd be interested if you do this, Aaron, and how you go with this exercise.
I love it. I love doing a bit of a post-mortem. Obviously, Bernadette, my wife, is the organized one. So that naturally we have a cash flow, and we've been open about how we manage our cash as well. Something that we use a tool called a 13-week rolling cash flow. So immediately we can see over the next 13 weeks what's coming in, what's going out. So instead of like a budget that can look, I guess, forward or retrospectively, kind of real time, go, okay, we know what the commitments are going to be over the next 13 weeks. Is there a period of time where we know it's going to be a little bit skinny? And then how do we manage our cash flow as well? The same thing's around a diary where we're looking at a Sunday going, where's our time going this week? Who's doing kids, or who's traveling, or whatever it's going to be, knowing that, again, we've got commitments, whether that's financial or we've got time commitments with kids and our own priorities personally, professionally. And we've got to make allowances as well. And I'll come to relationships in a second, because I think managing that as a couples and again, as a family, different dynamics as you grow. But yeah, I think the other part is you can dig your head in the sand, or you can look at this and go, I'm going to get on the front foot and actually find out where my time or where my money's going. And I love that part of the book, that exercise. I think it hammers home, rather than kind of sweeping under the carpet. Another month goes by and you're wondering why you're not enjoying or thriving in life.
Yeah, and you don't have to do a full makeover overnight. In fact, I would definitely suggest not doing that. You can just think, what is one small step I'm going to take this week to more closely align my values with the way I'm spending my resources? So don't try to change the world overnight. Just think, what is one small thing I can do this week? And then you'll slowly start to see improvements and more enjoyment from where you're spending your time and money.
Beautiful. You mentioned around people that, in finance, for example, and you take the example because you worked in finance and I worked in the bank as well, that maybe aren't too savvy with their own finances. And I feel like, and this would go, maybe it's scaled pain. So people that are earning 250K versus people that are earning 50K, they're living to that lifestyle. But then what happens is a bit of lifestyle creep. So you get the pay rise, And I used to joke about them, like they've already spent that pay rise before they've actually received it. So you received the 10 grand bonus and they've already spent the bonus in their mind going overseas a holiday,
Happens every time.
upgrade the wardrobe. And it's like, man, you've spent more than that and you've actually net impact, you've gone backwards.
Mm.
How do people, I don't know, acknowledge that lifestyle creep, identify it, address it?
One thing that really helps with that is just keeping track of where your money's going. And so knowing each month what's coming in and what's going out. So you might not be someone who wants to do a budget or a cash flow plan or anything like this, but at least written down somewhere what you earned this month and what you spent this month. And then you've got some tool, it could just be in your notes app on your phone, and you can get a bit of a pulse check and what's happened over the last 6 months and what's happened over the last 3 years. Has my income increased as much as my spending's increased? And then that's a really good way to reflect on, just at a really high level, how your income increasing and getting bonuses is impacting your spending. Something else that's really helpful is if you do get a bonus or a tax refund or any unexpected cash windfall, is to just note that down in your app somewhere and write down where you allocated or spent that money. So often when we get unexpected money, we treat it differently to the way we treat our normal money that we're getting from our job each month. And suddenly we're going, oh, the $5,000 bonus, I can just go out and buy so many things. And we often end up spending more, as you mentioned, than we got in the bonus. So just taking a moment, not spending or allocating it into different accounts straight away, and just noting down and reflecting on it and going, well, okay, I've got this $5,000. I'm putting 2 into my offset account. I'm putting 1,000 into my savings for my trip next year. And maybe I'm allocating $2,000 to this thing I've been wanting to buy for a while, but just write that down. And so you can reflect on this over the years. So instead of wondering what on earth has happened to your tax refunds over the last 5 years, you can look at this note and go, okay, this is where I allocated my money. And this is just becoming a little bit more in tune with your finances, making you pause and reflect on any unexpected income. So you don't just treat it like free money, because it's your money. And it also makes you think about, am I spending in line with my values and am I spending intentionally? Because sometimes we can go off and make purchases very rashly that we don't think through. And a month later we go, oh, I wish I hadn't bought that new laptop because it didn't really serve my needs and requirements at the time. I actually wanted this laptop. And if I'd taken a week to think about it and, okay, I needed a laptop, but what kind of laptop do I need? How many gigs? What am I doing with the laptop? Then maybe we could have made a better purchase that will serve us better over the long term.
Sage advice. The amount of times that we see people just go and blow money and it's like there's no thought given, and it's almost like that little bit of impulsiveness is what they were chasing, a little bit of dopamine hit.
Oh, we get so much enjoyment from spending money, but it's not always the best thing for future us.
Absolutely. We've spoken a lot about goal setting. So again, something that I love that's coming out of your book as well. Goals, the power of goal setting. There's been so much research that goes into people's ability to hit their goals, or likelihood of achieving it by writing it down, or likelihood of vision boards, or the likelihood of having an accountability coach or buddy, or being part of a community, or putting it out there to the world. This is what I want to achieve, not to beat your chest, but to go, hey, look, I'm really going to set my heart and mind to achieving this target as well. I'll start with what did you unpack in the book? And then I'll go to the next question, which is, why do people find it so hard to achieve financial goals?
One of the things I spoke about in the book, because I've had discussions with many of my podcast listeners over the years who have gone, well, I don't really have a financial goal. I don't know what I'm working towards. And so setting goals is something that I don't really understand. I can't connect with. And one of the things that has helped people is just really coming up with one sort of conceptual idea of why you want to improve your finances. And most people broadly do want to improve their finances, but if they can put their finger on why they want to do it, and maybe it's to have more flexibility to spend time with family, or to be able to take their kids on adventures around Australia, or they want to be a nomadic worker and be traveling and working overseas, or they want to retire early. If you can have some general why or North Star, that makes it a lot easier to work towards financial figures that you're thinking about. Because if you don't have some sort of general direction you want to head in, you can be quite aimless with your finances, and it can be hard to stick to any budget or cash flow or automation you decide to put in place. So thinking about what is the general direction I want to head in and why do I want to do that? And then you can work backwards from there. So you can set financial goals, and maybe it's a property goal, maybe it's an investing goal, maybe it's working on your superannuation. You can work backwards from this big overarching goal. So I'm definitely someone who likes setting lots of smaller goals, and I like to see that progress, and I like to check in, and I like to review at the end of the month. But I know that's a lot for many people. So having a general direction, having maybe at least a twice yearly check-in with your finances, that's something I would schedule in my calendar, so that twice a year at the least, I'm checking in, I'm just making sure things are generally heading in the right direction. I'm looking at where my big purchases have been and whether that's in line with my values. I'm seeing whether I have any bills I can negotiate, because that often happens when we become a little bit switched off with our finances. All of these providers hike fees up, and we end up on options and using services that might not be the best for us. So many times in finance, I'm not sure if you've got some different examples, but loyalty doesn't pay. So it takes time, but it's worth renegotiating and looking at whether you've got the best product and service for you at any one time.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. And I'll usually say to that when people with loyalty tax, it's like, hey, look, if you're not good with your own money and your time, someone else is going to be. And generally they find ways to, price increases. It's like, hey, all you got to do is pick up the phone and say, what can you do to sharpen the rate on this or sharpen the pencil? It's like, you don't necessarily always have to keep moving banks. It kind of gets pedaled around and refinance. Now you're going to push your loan back out to another 30 years. You could be 5 years into that loan. How can you just make additional repayments on top of that? We're talking about a loan here, for example. Savings, you don't have to go and chase a brokerage that charges you less fees. You can just find ways that are like lower cost investing, but you can keep adding the $20 a week instead of a lunch out. You go, hey, look, this lunch is going to be replaced by one investment, an extra $20 incremental investment. It's like just the game can be won from smaller steps than big drastic steps, because our likelihood of taking a big drastic step is kind of less compared to smaller steps as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And small changes really add up. They might not seem like anything when we do them. They might go, oh, that is so negligible, it can't improve my finances at all. But if you make small changes on a daily and a weekly basis, then that makes a huge difference to your finances over time. And I think anyone that's been on a compound interest calculator or a retirement contribution calculator, and you've played around with the figures, I'd really encourage you, if you haven't already, to go and have a look at this. And what difference would $5 extra a week make to my investments and my retirement? What difference would $50 a month make? And you'll start to see that small changes really add up over time.
Yeah. What if someone's listening and go, hey, Kate, don't be tone deaf. I'm living paycheck to paycheck and I don't have the $50 a week to invest. And like, I'd love to even think about investing, but my mindset right at the moment is survival. And there's some people that are actually doing it tough and going paycheck to paycheck. How do you politely help them?
A huge amount of Australians are struggling right now. Some of the research that Aware Super did from Australians early in the year showed that 9 in 10 Australians were struggling with their finances or somewhat stressed with their finances at the moment. So it's a huge issue. It is impacting everyone. And financial stress impacts our mental well-being, our physical well-being. We're less productive at work. It does have a huge impact on our lives. I would say if someone is struggling right now, that firstly, be really kind to yourself and not judging yourself based off where your finances are right now. If you're struggling with debt, you can talk to the National Debt Helpline. They have free financial counsellors that are confidential, they're independent, and they'll advocate with you and advocate for you to the hardship department of a bank or a phone company and things like that. So they'll go into that with you. There's also a lot to be said for learning. So often I talk about to our listeners that if you don't have the money to save and invest right now, what are some of the things you can do that don't involve money? And you can use your time to spend learning as much as you can about your finances, so that when you are in a better position to put $5 away each week, you can, and you've got the tools and resources at your disposal. So spend as much time as possible learning, listening to podcasts, reading books, looking at things, finding out where your super is, finding out what you're invested in, finding out what tax bracket you're in. Like, learn all of these things about your finances so that when you have more resources at your disposal, you're ready to start and taking action.
I love it. Thank you very much. In your book, you titled it Buying Happiness. And my first instinct is, can we actually buy happiness? And what are your thoughts? Because I think there's some really good research that comes out going, at what income level do you need to feel happy or feel wealthy, for example? And so just take us through the title and I guess how you came to that would be an interesting one.
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation starter because I think everyone has a opinion either way. And it's quite interesting when you start looking at the research, it's very obvious that we can't just walk into the supermarket and buy happiness off the shelf. But there's a lot of small changes we can make with the way we spend our money and time to boost our happiness. And one of those things looks like sometimes we want to outsource things and buy our time back. And that could look like using an accountant. So if you are like me and really hate doing your tax returns each year and know it's probably going to take you 10 or 20 hours to get it right and figure out the ATO website because you've got a few investments and things going on, you could outsource this task to an expert who could do it in a fraction of the time, and you will pay some money, but you get a lot of time back and you don't have to experience the stress. So that's something for some people that might look like getting a cleaner or buying takeout once a week. So exchanging your money for your time and avoiding stress is one way that we can boost our happiness. I mentioned earlier, but we can boost our happiness by spending our time and money on other people. And that doesn't have to be anything huge. It could just be buying your colleague at work a coffee, because that invests in the relationship. It shows that you're wanting to spend time with them. And there was I collected research as well from our podcast community. So I didn't just look at the academic research. I did look at what was happening in Australia. And I asked about, I think it was a few thousand people that shared their responses on what added value to their life. And I was saying, what is the one thing that's really small, it doesn't cost very much, that boosts your happiness? And so many people mentioned coffee in Australia. Coffee came up, whether it was a coffee machine to spend time in the morning with your partner and your family having a coffee, whether it was a walk with your mum along the path along the river with a coffee from a coffee shop. It was a coffee machine at work. Like, coffee just came up time and time again. But there were so many other little examples. It might have been a hydro flask or a picnic basket. There are lots of small purchases you can make to boost your happiness. So it doesn't have to be an expensive thing. Some of the other research showed that it was experiences that boost our happiness a lot, but it's not just the experience, it's doing the experience with other people, because that adds that relationship aspect in as well, because relationships are a really huge determiner of our health and well-being long term. So whether we could buy a concert ticket. So many people recently went to Taylor Swift or Blink-182 or Pink in Australia. And so doing that with someone else, not only you get to anticipate the event, I think the whole nation was definitely anticipating Taylor Swift for months, especially from what I was seeing. You get to anticipate the event, you get to enjoy the event with someone else. So you're creating memories, you're investing in the relationship. And then you also get this concept called memory dividends. It's in this book called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins, but you get to remember and recall this experience over many years to come. I've spoken to many of my parents' friends who talk super fondly about the concerts they've been to in their 20s and 30s and remember those experiences and then remember who they went to. So if you think you've got a bit of money, you're trying to think, how am I going to spend it to boost my happiness? An experience with someone else in the future that you book and you can anticipate it is definitely a good way to go.
Yeah. There's also, I guess, this concept of I'll only be happy when I get there. And it's obviously, I mean, we've all been there at some point in our lives. When I earn X, I will finally be happy. Or when I buy this, I will be happy. And look, I've made some purchases in my life, whether it's a watch that I've been off for some time, or I indulged in a really nice pen for my birthday the other year. I was like, I got it. And I was like, that's cool. But I felt like when I wanted it, like when I couldn't buy it, I wanted it more. And when I had it, I was like, that's cool. And I've used it a handful of times. And it was very clear to me that I'm like, these aren't like exorbitant purchases, but they still cost a little bit more. I was like, the incremental happiness just wasn't there. There's got to be some research around that. Like we want it, then we have it, and the happiness just fades off pretty quickly.
We fall into that trap a lot of I'll be happy when ... And you can pretty much insert anything in there. Someone has had that experience. And social media definitely doesn't help us here. One way to sort of combat that is really thinking on what do I have right now and how can I enjoy the time and money and the people around me right now. And so try not to get constantly stuck in that future focus mindset. It is really important to think about our future and many things that we invest in, whether it's our investments or our career or our relationships, they do require many years and decades of work. And so you do need some future aspect when you're thinking ahead, but you also need to think about how can I really be in the moment and be enjoying this present moment with my friends, my family, and the resources I have. So coming back to that exercise earlier of talking about our priorities, if you can identify what your priorities are right now and how you can maximize using your resources on those priorities, then you can really be in the moment. And something I talk about a bit on the podcast is like if your goals are making you miserable because you're constantly thinking about the future and you're not reaching them, or you're having to sacrifice everything to get to those goals, then you probably need new goals. It's okay to sacrifice and put things aside for a certain period of time, but there's definitely things that you shouldn't be sacrificing for years on end. So if you are working 3 jobs to save up for a house, and that means for 5 years you're barely spending any time with your friends, your family, and on your health, I'd probably rethink that, because you need to find a way that you can focus more on a certain priority at a particular time, but you're still getting those really important elements of life, because your time is ticking by over those 5 years you're working towards that goal. Your relationships need to be invested in, your health needs to be invested in. All these things you can put on the back burner for so long, but you can't put them on the back burner forever. So it's coming back to your priorities, but I would always recommend not letting your health and your relationships falling too far down that list. I think they should always be somewhere in the top 5, considering how important they are to our overall health and well-being.
Oh, absolutely. I think obviously COVID taught us everything about health is wealth. You can have all the money in the bank, but if you're not well, point. If you don't have people to celebrate that with, what's the point? We've all met people that are rich that are grumpy bastards or whatever, unhappy. You're like, clearly that's not the goal either. So there's finding a real sweet spot. And I think what you said there is if your goals and what you're edging towards is making you unhappy, we need to recheck them. And I think just fallen into this mindlessness around how I need to achieve X by X. And it's like, are you running your own race or who are you trying to really impress? And it's really hard to rewire that when you're hard coded to keep up or be competitive or think that you need to hit
it. And we keep moving the goalposts. So many people, they start investing and they're like, I'll be happy with 1,000 invested. Oh, that's not enough. 10,000, 100,000, a million, then it just keeps going. And if you can't find a way to be happy with what you've got, if you can't find enough for you, and that's going to be very individual for everyone, you're just going to keep striving for something more. And it's probably going to make you miserable in the process because you're not fully enjoying the resources you have right now.
Well, that's a real penny drop moment. Thank you very much. I guess in the context of what we do, and you've been around this for a long time, is around property. And it's the greatest joy when we can find people that, you know, their happiness and their family's happiness is centered around being able to buy a property or an investment property and grow their wealth as well. But there's also a small sub segment of the market that experience buyer's remorse or post-purchase dissonance. And I guess when I jump on a call afterwards, like, yeah, it's great. And I'm like, there's a but coming. And it's like, it's a bit small, or it's not what we expected, or it's a bit noisy. And I think it goes to your laptop purchase, which is we've rushed the decision-making or made a shortcut on a decision-making process here, or we bought that investment property, but now it's costing us a lot in maintenance, or the hot water's blown up. Take me through, because I know there's an interesting bit of research that I want to get to having chat to you about as well. So what has your research shown around a buyer remorse and post-purchase dissonance as well?
It's interesting. So for this podcast, I did some searching. Now I found a study done in Europe, so not Australia. So there may be some differences in values here, but I did see a lot that rung true from what I've heard from listeners in the past. And they were talking about how important property is to so many people. And it's it's not just having it as an investment, because people think about property much more than just the dollars and cents on a spreadsheet. Property to people is a really emotional purchase in many cases, especially for people's first home. And feelings that get brought up, and they reported the number one feeling people have about owning their own property was pride, and having pride in their home and being able to invite people over and knowing that this was theirs, they'd worked hard to get there. So that was really interesting. And there was also some research that showed that it wasn't really how big the home was that made people happy. It was how spacious it felt to them. And that was sort of more of a state of being, of whether you enjoyed and felt comfortable in the space. So spaciousness, I guess, is very subjectable, because I could have a really small apartment, but it feels really comfortable and secure to me. And for someone else, that might feel like a tiny place. It might feel like a prison. So that's quite interesting as well. There's so many subjective parts with a home, that I could love a house and you could hate it, and it could be exactly the same house, and we could be both two individual people. And there was also some research which confirmed what I'd heard from another expert a while ago, was that often we think about, and I've heard property experts, maybe you don't say this, in the past say that you should buy the worst house on the best street. I don't know if you've talked about this on the past on the
I don't
show.
subscribe to that, but I'll let you go and then I'll go afterwards.
So they actually found from the people they were speaking to in Europe that it often left people feeling worse. And the reason is, while it might make sense on paper as an investment decision, it led people to really constant feelings of comparison and that idea of keeping up with the Joneses. Because if you're buying the worst house on the best street, chances are people around you have higher levels of income. Maybe they've got fancier cars. Maybe their kids are going to the better school. And so you're constantly seeing people with more than you. And that gives you those constant feelings of, I have less, I need more, I don't have enough, I need to get to the next level. And so even though you might have, before you thought about the neighbors, been really happy with that purchase and that decision, and it might have been a great investment, once you're actually living the reality of seeing these people every day and looking out, and it's very hard to turn off our brain's comparison loop, you might realize, hey, that is not actually bringing me as much happiness as I thought. I thought the house was going to make me happy, but I actually feel worse seeing and talking to these people around me. And that, I'm sure, doesn't play out for everyone, but it was an experience that many people were having when they had a look at it.
Kate, you're spot on there. And the amount of times that when, I guess the way that we can also bring that locally is when people buy purely on price. They're just like, I need to get a particular suburb or be in this house, and they've bought the cheapest property they could to get in there. It's bought on their own location, it's a sloping block, or it's a busy intersection, or right next to a school, or whatever it is. I've had one bought near a service station, but they were in the right, the right suburb, and they quickly fall out of love with the property. It's like, ugh, I know that, but they were all, those factors were all there before you bought it. You just shortcut your due diligence, for example,
Yeah.
into a decision, and then the buyer remorses come off the back of you not doing your due diligence and suitability for long enough, right?
Yeah. And like, there's a real trap. I've had friends that have done all the research and thought this is a great emerging suburb and I should buy there. And they didn't actually spend much time spending a weekend in the suburb and going to the cafes and going to the Woolies nearby and experiencing what it's like to be there during the day, to be there at night, getting the train there, because that's important to many people in Melbourne, how that experience is, and seeing the parks. And then they moved in and realized, oh, it misses a lot of the aspects that we loved from where we used to live. And so we thought it was great and it looked great on paper, but when we start living that lifestyle, it's a very different experience from what we expected. And it didn't add as much value to our life because we didn't have all the things that were really important to us available.
I agree. Yeah, they're bought on price and they moved, three, four suburbs across, and now they're a bit ostracized because they're too far from their friends or family. And it's like mildly inconvenient for them, or like compromise on the schools they want to see their kids to. And it's like, yeah, these sound like first world problems, but for happiness, we live in the context that we are, which is we're in a great nation. We've got so much to love for it. And we could be able to chase our dreams when it comes to achieving the right lifestyle. But again, I think it goes right back to the start, which is clarity on what you want, clarity on what will give you what you want in terms of your happiness and where your time and your money is going as well, isn't it?
Most people need to ask why a few more times when they think about a goal. They might want a property here and they go, well, why do I want that property? What's inspired that goal? Are there any social family pressures I'm feeling right now? Am I really urgent to buy because I'm seeing these articles on the news that are talking about this suburb jumping 20% over the next few months? What is causing this? And just maybe ask yourself why a few more times when you're thinking about your goals to make sure that's really what you want and that's what you want to spend your hard-earned money and time on.
Spot on, perfect. Now, I understand that you have a course that you offer people as well. Do you want to take us through like, how people can get in touch with you and access that as well?
Yeah, my co-host Owen and I have a website called Rask Education, and that has heaps of free financial education courses. And we've got over 26,000 Australians taking these free courses, everything from how to buy your first home, so that might be of interest to listeners or their family and friends, to sorting out your super and buying an ETF and how to budget. So everything you could want. Many of them are taught by experts. So we've got like a financial advisor who's doing a budget and cash flow course, and he gives you his free spreadsheet that he uses with his clients. So there's heaps of different resources there. So if you just Google Rask Education, you'll find it. Otherwise, tune into the Australian Finance Podcast, where we talk about these topics on a very regular basis.
Beautiful. I love it. We'll include all the details as well. And Kate, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but every time we get an author come in, can we do a giveaway for one of your books? Is that possible?
You absolutely can.
Beautiful. So what we're going to do is, for the listeners, if you've loved what Kate's message is, drop us a DM with a little gold nugget that you got out of this. And I guess we'll always put a first in best dress. So whoever drops us a DM after listening to this episode, we'll shoot you through a copy of Kate's book, Buying Happiness. I think it's going to be it is an absolute winning read, Kate. So I want to say well done for putting pen to paper on that and putting something there that I think people really need to hear and really absorb in their own time. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me and taking the time to read the book and explore some of those topics with me.
I love it. Wonderful. Hey, if you love this episode, feel free to leave us a review or better yet, subscribe and tell a friend about this episode if you think this is what they need to hear in their life as well. Until next time, take care.